He smirked at me across the courtroom aisle. Not a smile, a smirk. The kind that says, I won, you lost, and you are too stupid to even know how badly. My husband of 12 years had just stolen my father's $180 million company.
Including Sterling
He had turned my
Enterprises,
own
to my
daughter
daughter,
against me.
Flora
He had
Vance.
left me with $43 in my bank account and an
little
eviction
secret is out.
notice on my door.
Stay
And as
away
I
from my
signed those
children.
divorce papers, with
Richard,
shaking
you
hands,
snake!
wearing an
I have the proof
$11
right here. You're
coat
finished.
from Goodwill, he actually winked at his 26-year-old mistress sitting in the gallery. He thought he had won. He thought I was too broken, too stupid, too beaten down to ever fight back. But what Richard Sterling did not know was that my father had set a trap from beyond the grave. A trap that had been waiting 5 years to spring, and when the judge pulled out that dusty, sealed envelope, when she read those words out loud, Richard's smirk did not just fade. It shattered. This is the story of how I lost everything, hit rock bottom, discovered rock bottom had a basement, and then burned my husband's entire empire to the ground. Stay with me until the end. Because the twist you think is coming, that is not the real twist. The real twist made me drop my phone when I found out, and I lived through it. Value statement. Before we begin, I want you to know something. This is not just a revenge story. This is a survival guide. Hidden inside this story are 7 pieces of advice that could save your life if you ever find yourself trapped in a marriage with a manipulator. I learned these lessons the hard way, so you do not have to. Listen carefully. Take notes if you need to, because one day you or someone you love might need this information. Now, let us begin. Story meaning this story is about more than revenge. It is about remembering who you are when someone has spent years trying to make you forget. It is about the power of sisterhood. The women who show up with casseroles and courage when you have nothing left. The friends who wait 3 years for you to call because they know you will need them eventually. It is about the truth that asking for help is not weakness. It is the first step toward finding your strength. And most importantly, it is about this simple fact. You are not crazy, you are not weak, and you are not alone. No matter how powerful the monster in your life seems, no matter how carefully he has built his cage around you, there is always a way out. There is always hope. There is always someone willing to fight beside you. You just have to reach out your hand. He smirked at me across the courtroom aisle. Not a smile. A smirk, the kind that says, I won, you lost, and you are too stupid to even know how badly. I watched my husband of 12 years, the father of my 2 children, look at me like I was roadkill. He was about to scrape off his expensive Italian shoes. His lips curled up at the corners in that expression I had come to know so well over the years. The expression that said he was better than everyone else in the room. The expression that said he had already calculated every possible outcome and knew exactly how this was going to end. And the worst part? I believed him. I believed I deserved that smirk. I believed everything he had ever told me about myself. That I was too emotional, too naive, too focused on my silly little paintings to understand the real world. That was my first mistake. My last mistake would be his. My name is Flora Vance, and on that freezing January morning, in Cook County Family Court, I was about to sign away everything I had ever loved. My father's company, my children's future, my own sense of worth. Everything that had once made me who I was had been slowly stripped away over 12 years of marriage, and now I was about to hand over the final pieces. I sat alone at the defendant's table in a coat I had bought from Goodwill for $11 because Richard had frozen all our accounts 3 months earlier. The coat smelled faintly of mothballs and someone else's perfume, but it was warm, and warm was all I could afford to care about anymore. My hands shook as I held the pen, the cheap ballpoint they give you in courtrooms, the kind that always seems to run out of ink at the worst possible moment. I had lost 22 pounds since the divorce proceedings began 6 months ago. Not from dieting, not from some trendy wellness program, from the kind of stress that makes food taste like cardboard and sleep feel like drowning. From lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had let my life become this disaster. From skipping meals so my children could eat because Richard had made sure I had no access to any money. Across the aisle, Richard Sterling sat with his $800 per hour legal team. 3 lawyers in matching navy suits, their briefcases polished to a mirror shine, their faces arranged in expressions of professional boredom. They had done this 1,000 times before. They would do it 1,000 times again. I was just another case file to them, just another woman being ground up by the system. Their leader was Marcus Blackwood, a man known in divorce circles as the Butcher. He had earned that nickname by systematically destroying the opposing party in every case he touched. He did not just win divorces, he annihilated them. He left nothing behind but scorched earth and broken spirits. Richard had hired the best. Of course he had. He always did. Richard himself looked immaculate. As always, charcoal suit that cost more than 3 months of my rent. The fabric was Italian, hand-stitched, fitted perfectly to his broad shoulders. His dark hair was styled with that careful carelessness that takes an hour to achieve. His jaw was clean-shaven, his nails manicured, his shoes polished, until they gleamed. He looked like a man who had never struggled for anything in his life. He looked like a man who had been born knowing he would win. In the gallery behind him, trying to look inconspicuous, sat Vanessa Dalloway, 26 years old, blonde hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, legs that went on forever, crossed elegantly beneath her designer dress. She was supposed to be his executive assistant. That was the official story, the one they told at company parties and board meetings. Everyone in this courtroom knew she was actually his mistress. Everyone knew they had been sleeping together for at least 2 years, probably longer. Everyone except apparently the judge, who had seen too many of these cases to care about the personal details anymore. I wondered if Vanessa knew about the others, the assistant before her, the client's wife in Seattle, the woman he met at a conference in Miami. I wondered if she thought she was special, if she believed she was different from all the rest. I had thought I was special once too. 12 years. I gave him 12 years, 2 children, and my father's entire company. I gave him my youth, my dreams, my sense of self. I gave him everything I had, and in return, he gave me this courtroom, this cheap coat, this pen that was probably going to run out of ink before I finished signing away my future. And here I sat, unable to afford my own lawyer, wearing a stranger's coat, about to sign away everything because I was too tired to fight anymore. Marcus Blackwood stood and addressed the court. His voice was smooth and practiced, the voice of a man who knew exactly how much power he wielded. Your Honor, my client is prepared to finalize the dissolution of this marriage today. The terms have been agreed upon by both parties. We see no reason for further delay. Judge Patricia Caldwell peered over her reading glasses at the documents before her. She was a stern woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and lines around her mouth that suggested she had spent decades frowning at the worst of human behavior. She had seen it all, the lies, the manipulation, the desperate attempts to hide assets and destroy reputations. I wondered what she saw when she looked at me. Another victim? Another fool? Or just another case to process before lunch? Mrs. Sterling, she said, and I flinched at the name. I had not been Mrs. Sterling in my heart for years. I had just been too afraid to admit it. Do you understand and accept the terms of this settlement? I looked down at the papers spread before me. 47 pages of legalese that Richard's lawyers had drafted and my court-appointed attorney had barely glanced at before telling me I should sign. The settlement that would determine the rest of my life. The townhouse. That was what I was getting. The townhouse that was 3 months behind on mortgage payments, Richard had stopped making without telling me. The townhouse where the heating barely worked and the roof leaked when it rained. The townhouse that would be foreclosed on in 30 days if I could not come up with $12,000 I did not have, $1,800 a month in alimony. But only for 2 years. After that, I would be on my own. As if 2 years was enough time to rebuild a life that had been systematically dismantled over more than a decade. Weekday custody of our children. Emma, 11 years old, with her father's dark hair and sharp tongue. Lucas, 8 years old, quiet and watchful, always watching. That was it. That was my entire settlement. Richard got everything else. Vance Logistics, the company my father had built from nothing into a $180 million empire. The company that should have been my inheritance. The company that was supposed to secure my children's future. He got the lake house where we had spent every summer, where I had taught Emma to swim and Lucas to fish. He got the investment accounts that held our retirement savings. He got the vacation properties I did not even know we owned. He got the future. I got the scraps. I understand, Your Honor, I whispered. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else, someone who had already given up. Richard leaned across the aisle. His movement was casual, almost lazy, but his eyes were sharp. His voice was low enough that the court reporter would not catch it, but loud enough that every word carved itself into my brain. Just sign it, L. Let us end this misery. He always called me L when he wanted to seem affectionate, when he wanted to remind me of the early days when I thought he loved me. You know you cannot win. You have never been able to win anything without someone holding your hand. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to stand up and tell the judge everything about the affairs, about the lies, about the way he had systematically destroyed my confidence over 12 years until I genuinely believed I was worthless without him. I wanted to tell her about the time he threw my paintings in the trash and told me I was wasting my life on childish hobbies, about the time he convinced me to cut off my best friend because she was jealous and trying to poison our marriage, about the time he held my face in his hands and told me, so gently, so lovingly, that I was lucky he stayed with me because no one else would ever want someone so broken. But I was so tired, so broken, so convinced that he was right about me. What was the point of fighting? He had better lawyers. He had more money. He had spent years making sure everyone believed he was the successful, put-upon husband dealing with an unstable wife. He had documentation and witnesses and a narrative that painted me as the villain of my own story. I signed my name, Flora Vance Sterling. The pen scratched against the paper like a death rattle, like the sound of a door closing forever. Richard took the documents next. He did not hesitate. He did not even pretend to read them. He just signed with a flourish, his signature bold and confident, the signature of a man who had already won. And then he looked directly at me, and he smirked. It was not a smile. It was a sneer of absolute dominance, a look that said everything he had never bothered to say out loud. I took everything your father built. I took your self-respect. I took your best years, and you just handed it all over because you are too pathetic to fight. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give him that satisfaction. I would not let him see me cry. That was the only victory I had left. Done, Richard announced, sliding the papers toward the bailiff with a casual flick of his wrist. "Is that all, Your Honor? I have a flight to catch." A flight to catch? He was probably taking Vanessa somewhere warm and beautiful, somewhere with white sand, beaches, and cocktails served by the pool, somewhere to celebrate his victory while I figured out how to feed my children on $1,800 a month. Judge Caldwell did not answer immediately. She was looking at something on her desk, a thick envelope that had not been there when the proceedings began. Her brow furrowed slightly, and she adjusted her reading glasses. "Actually, Mr. Sterling," the judge said slowly, her voice carrying a weight that made the air in the courtroom feel suddenly heavier, "there is one more matter to address before I can finalize this decree." Richard's smirk flickered, just slightly, just enough for me to notice. "What matter?" "It appears that this court has received documentation regarding the estate of the late Arthur Vance." Judge Caldwell held up the envelope. It was old, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax that had cracked but not broken. A sealed codicil to his last will and testament, with a very specific trigger clause. I stopped breathing. My father had been dead for 5 years. His estate had been settled. The lawyers had gone through everything. The probate court had signed off. It was done, or so I thought. "This is highly irregular." Marcus Blackwood stood up, his voice sharp, with practiced outrage. "We were given no notice of any additional documentation." "This is a clear violation of procedure. The notice was filed with this court 18 months ago, Mr. Blackwood." Judge Caldwell's voice was ice, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been satisfaction. "Your firm acknowledged receipt. Perhaps you should review your own records before accusing this court of impropriety." Richard's face went pale beneath his perfect tan. "What codicil?" "There was no codicil. I handled his entire estate personally. I went through every document." Judge Caldwell broke the wax seal on the envelope. The sound of tearing paper filled the silent courtroom like a thunderclap. "According to this document," the judge read aloud, her voice clear and deliberate, "in the event of my daughter Flora's divorce, a full forensic audit shall be conducted of all asset transfers from Vance Logistics during the marriage. This audit shall be performed by an independent firm, pre-selected by me and held in trust until needed." I stared at the judge, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My father. Even from the grave, my father was trying to protect me. Even after everything, after all the years I had pushed him away, after all the times I had chosen Richard over him, he was still trying to save me. "This is absurd," Richard sputtered. His composure was cracking, and I could see the panic beneath the surface. "You cannot just spring this on us. This will delay proceedings for months. My client has rights." "Your client," Judge Caldwell said, looking at Richard with an expression I could not quite read, "has the right to due process, and so does Mrs. Sterling. The forensic audit is mandatory under the terms of Mr. Vance's trust. I am postponing the finalization of this divorce for 90 days, pending the audit results." 90 days. For one moment, one beautiful, terrible moment, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. But then I saw the look that passed between Richard and his lawyer. A look of annoyance, yes, frustration at the delay, but not fear, not worry, because Richard had covered his tracks. Whatever my father had planned, Richard had been planning longer. He had been preparing for this for years. He had documentation and alibis and explanations for everything. Whatever secrets my father thought he was hiding, Richard had already found them and buried them deeper still. 90 days was 90 days. It was more than I had expected, more than I had dared to hope for. As we exited the courtroom, Richard caught my arm. His grip was gentle, almost friendly, but his eyes were anything but. "Cute trick with the codicil," he whispered. His breath was warm against my ear, and I fought the urge to pull away. But your daddy should have spent less time setting traps and more time teaching you how to read a contract. See you in 90 days, sweetheart. I hope you enjoy your little vacation from reality. He released me and walked away, Vanessa falling into step beside him like she had been trained to do. I watched them leave, her hand slipping into his, her laugh echoing off the marble floors. The sound of victory, the sound of everything I had lost. I had 90 days, no money, no lawyer worth the name, 2 children who still thought their father hung the moon, and a codicil from a dead man that might mean nothing at all. I did not know it then, but I was about to learn the hardest lesson of my life. Sometimes you have to hit absolute rock bottom before you find out what you are really made of. And rock bottom, as it turned out, had a basement. To understand how I ended up in that courtroom, signing away everything my family had built, you have to understand how I met Richard Sterling. And to understand that, you have to understand my father. Arthur Vance was not a warm man. He did not give hugs or say I love you or remember birthdays without his secretary reminding him 3 times. He was not the kind of father who showed up to school plays or taught me to ride a bike or tucked me in at night with bedtime stories. He was the kind of father who worked 18-hour days building an empire. The kind who believed that actions spoke louder than words, that providing for your family meant giving them financial security, not emotional availability. The kind who showed love by solving problems, by fixing things, by making sure the practical details of life were handled. I resented him for most of my childhood. I wanted a father who would sit with me while I painted, who would tell me my dreams mattered, who would make me feel seen. Instead, I got a man who left checks on my dresser and thought money could substitute for presents. But he loved me. I know that now. He loved me in his own way, fiercely and protectively, in a way I did not recognize until it was far too late. Arthur Vance built Vance Logistics from nothing. 1 truck and a dream, he used to say, his eyes getting distant as he remembered those early days. 1 truck, a handful of clients, and the stubborn refusal to give up. By the time I was born, that 1 truck had become a fleet of thousands, crisscrossing the country with shipments of everything from furniture to pharmaceuticals. By the time I graduated high school, Vance Logistics was worth over $100 million and growing every year. I wanted nothing to do with it. I was an artist, a painter. I saw the world in colors and shapes and emotions, not in spreadsheets and profit margins. I rejected my father's money, his world of board meetings and acquisition strategies and quarterly reports. I wanted to make something beautiful. I wanted to prove that I was more than just Arthur Vance's daughter. I moved into a tiny apartment in Chicago, enrolled at the School of the Art Institute, and told my father I did not need his help. I would make it on my own. I would prove myself. He respected that decision, even if he did not understand it, even if I could see the hurt in his eyes when I refused his offers of financial support. Let her find her own way, I overheard him telling my mother once. She is stubborn like me. She will not appreciate anything she has not earned. I met Richard when I was 22 years old in a coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment. He was 28, a junior analyst at a financial consulting firm, handsome and charming, and completely different from the stiff corporate types my father surrounded himself with. He spilled coffee on my painting. I had been working on it for 3 weeks. A watercolor of the Chicago skyline at sunset, all oranges and purples, and that particular shade of gold that only exists for a few minutes each day. I was almost finished. It was some of my best work, and this stranger bumped into my table and sent his entire cup of coffee cascading across my canvas. "Oh, God," he said, his face flooding with horror. "Oh, my God, I am so sorry. I am such a klutz. Please, let me pay for the supplies. Let me buy you dinner. Let me do something." He was so earnest, so apologetic, so different from the polished, calculated men I had grown up around. It was an accident. These things happen. No, he insisted. He pulled napkins from the dispenser and tried helplessly to blot the coffee from my ruined painting. "This is unforgivable. You were creating something beautiful, and I destroyed it because I was not looking where I was going." He told me later, after we were married, after he thought he had won completely, that he had practiced that coffee spill 17 times. 17. He had watched me in that coffee shop for weeks, learning my schedule, studying my habits. He had literally rehearsed ruining my painting like it was a Broadway audition. I should have known right then that any man who practices that hard at seeming accidental is planning something deliberate. But I was young. I was naive. I was so desperate to be loved by someone who seemed to see me, the real me, not just Arthur Vance's daughter. Richard courted me like I was a prize to be won. Flowers delivered to my studio, always my favorite. White roses with baby's breath. How did he know they were my favorite? He had asked my roommate, pretending to be planning a surprise. Surprise trips to Paris, where he took me to the Louvre and stood behind me while I stared at paintings I had only seen in books. "You see things I cannot even imagine," he told me once, his arms wrapped around me from behind as we looked at a Monet. "You see beauty everywhere. I just see numbers and strategies. You make the world magical for me, Elle." I believed him. I believed every word. He made me feel like the center of the universe. He made me feel special in a way no one ever had before. He asked about my art, my dreams, my fears. He listened. He remembered details. He made me feel like I was the most important person in any room. "Your art is too important for you to worry about bills," he would say. "Let me handle the practical things. You focus on creating. Your friends do not understand your gift like I do," he would whisper. "They are jealous of you. They want to hold you back. You do not need people like that in your life. Let me handle your father. I know how to speak his language. You two have such a complicated relationship. Let me be the bridge." Slowly, so slowly I did not even notice, he isolated me from everyone. My friends drifted away because I stopped returning their calls. My work suffered because I started depending on Richard to pay the bills, so I did not need to sell paintings or take commissions. My sense of identity blurred at the edges because Richard was always there, always telling me who I was, always defining my reality. By the time we got married, Richard was my entire world. I had no one else. I had nothing else. Just him. My father saw through him from the beginning. The night before our wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, my father pulled me aside. We stood on the balcony of the country club, looking out over the golf course that would host our ceremony the next day. "Baby girl," he said, swirling his scotch in its glass. His voice was gruff, uncomfortable with emotion, as always. I have seen a lot of hungry men in my life. Men who want things, money, power, status. I have learned to recognize them. Daddy, please. Not tonight. And that boy?" He continued as if I had not spoken. "He is not hungry for you. He is hungry for what is behind you. If I am wrong, I will apologize. But I have set up insurance, just in case." "Insurance? What does that mean?" He did not answer directly. "Just promise me something, Flora. If things ever go wrong, really wrong, look for the breadcrumbs." "You are being paranoid. Richard loves me. Maybe." My father's eyes were sad in a way I had never seen before. I hope so. I hope I am just an overprotective old man who cannot let his daughter go. But if I am not, if that boy turns out to be who I think he is, remember what I said. Look for the breadcrumbs. I laughed it off. Overprotective father nonsense. I told him Richard loved me. I told him everything was going to be fine. 3 years later, my father died of a sudden heart attack. He was 64 years old. He had been under a lot of stress, the doctors said. His heart just gave out. Richard held me while I cried. He stroked my hair and whispered soothing words and promised to take care of everything. You should not have to deal with this, he told me. The funeral arrangements, the estate, the company. You are an artist, Elle. You are grieving. Let me handle the practical things. I should handle my own father's estate. You are too emotional right now to make good decisions. You will make mistakes. You will forget things. Let me help you. That is what husbands are for. He convinced me to sign a power of attorney. Just temporarily, he said. Just until the grief passed. Just until I was thinking clearly again. I will protect your legacy, he promised. I will make sure everything your father built is preserved for our children. And I believed him, because I had been trained, carefully and deliberately, over 3 years of marriage, to believe I was incapable of handling anything important on my own. Because every time I had tried to assert myself, to make my own decisions, Richard had been there to point out my mistakes, to remind me of my failures, to suggest gently that maybe I should just let him handle things. Over the next 5 years, Richard systematically dismantled everything my father had built for me. He appointed his friends and allies to the board of directors, one by one, replacing the loyal executives who had worked with my father for decades. He restructured the company in ways I did not understand, ways that transferred assets and voting rights into vehicles he controlled. He moved money into accounts I did not know existed. He signed contracts that benefited him and his associates. He used my power of attorney to authorize transactions I never saw, never reviewed, never questioned. And whenever I asked questions, whenever I expressed concern about the company or our finances, he would sigh. He would shake his head sadly. He would look at me with that patient expression that made me feel like a child asking stupid questions. The company is struggling, he would tell me. The market is difficult. I am working 18 hours a day just to keep us from bankruptcy. You would not understand the details, Elle. They are very complex. Just trust me. I trusted him, even when I found receipts for hotel rooms I had never seen. Even when he started coming home smelling like perfume that was not mine. Even when our children began to look at me with confusion because Daddy was never home and Mommy was always crying. I trusted him right up until the day he filed for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences, and I discovered that everything I thought I owned was already gone. Now, standing in the courthouse lobby with my $11 Goodwill coat pulled tight against the January wind, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. My father had left a codicil, a trap, set from beyond the grave, a final act of protection from a man I had spent most of my life resenting. Look for the breadcrumbs, he had told me. I did not know what that meant. I did not know if the codicil would make any difference at all. I did not know if I had any fight left in me. But for the first time in years, I felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. My bank balance showed $43. Enough for an Uber home and maybe groceries for the week if I was extremely careful. I scrolled through my contacts, past all the names of people Richard had convinced me to cut out of my life, past former friends who probably hated me now, past family members who had given up trying to reach me. And then I saw her name, Dana Williams. Dana had been my best friend in college, my roommate, my confidant. She had been there when I met Richard, and she had been the first to say something was wrong with him. She had tried to warn me, and I had cut her out of my life because Richard told me she was jealous. 3 years ago, I had stopped answering her calls. 3 years ago, I had blocked her number because Richard said her negativity was toxic to our marriage. I unblocked her now. My finger hovered over the call button. What if she did not answer? What if she hated me? What if she told me exactly what I deserved to hear? That I had been a terrible friend, and she wanted nothing to do with me. I called anyway, because I had no one else, because I was desperate, because something in me, some last surviving instinct, told me that Dana was the only person who might help me now. She answered on the second ring. Flora? Her voice was incredulous, hopeful, worried all at once. Oh my God. Flora, are you okay? I saw something in the news about the divorce. I tried to call, but your number was disconnected, and I did not know how to reach you. I opened my mouth to speak. What came out was a sob, a raw, ugly animal sound that I could not control. Where are you? Dana asked immediately. Her voice shifted into crisis mode, practical and determined. I am coming to get you. Just tell me where you are. The courthouse. I managed to choke out. Downtown. I do not know what to do, Dana. I do not know how to fix any of this. Stay there. Do not move. I am on my way. 30 minutes later, Dana's old Honda Civic pulled up to the curb. She jumped out before the car had fully stopped, leaving the engine running, and ran toward me. She looked exactly the same. Same wild curly hair, same bright eyes, same fierce expression that said she was ready to fight the entire world if necessary. She pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. I have been waiting 3 years for you to call me, she said into my hair. 3 years, Flora. I am so glad you finally did. I am sorry. I am so sorry I pushed you away. I believed everything he said about you. I was so stupid. Shh. Donna pulled back and looked at me with fierce determination. That is done. That is in the past. What matters now is what we do next. Come on, get in the car. I have wine, a couch, and a very petty desire to destroy your husband. Let us get to work. I climbed into her passenger seat. The car smelled like coffee and vanilla air freshener and something indefinably comforting, like safety, like coming home. In that moment, I did not know that Dana would become my lifeline. I did not know that her wife, Rachel, would talk me off a ledge I did not even know I was standing on. I did not know that this woman I had abandoned at my husband's insistence would be the one to help me save myself. All I knew was that for the first time in 5 years, someone was on my side. And that was enough to keep breathing. The townhouse was dark when I finally got home that night. Emma and Lucas were at Richard's penthouse for the weekend, part of the custody arrangement we had agreed on before I knew what I was really signing away. Dana had offered to come inside with me, but I told her I needed a few minutes alone. I needed to see my house, my life, with clear eyes. I needed to understand exactly how bad things really were. The answer was very bad. I walked through the door and immediately saw the envelope taped to the inside of the doorframe. White, official looking, my name printed in block letters. Eviction notice. Richard had stopped paying the mortgage 4 months ago. He had not mentioned this small detail during our settlement negotiations. He had let me believe I was getting something of value when he agreed to let me keep the house. In reality, he was giving me a time bomb. I had 30 days to come up with $12,000 or I would be on the street. 30 days to find money I did not have for a house that was probably not worth saving anyway. I sat down on the floor of my own foyer, still wearing my Goodwill coat, and I laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes right before complete collapse. The kind of laugh that scares small children and makes strangers cross to the other side of the street. I laughed until I could not breathe, until the laughter turned into sobs, until I was curled up on my own floor, crying so hard my chest hurt, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Forgot to mention the mortgage situation. My bad. Maybe you should have read those documents more carefully before signing, sweetheart. Send my love to the kids. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered. The screen cracked into a spider web of fractures, and I watched the light flicker and die. That phone had been my last real possession. Now it was as broken as everything else. I spent that night on the couch, unable to bring myself to sleep in the bed Richard and I had shared for 12 years. I stared at the ceiling and tried to make a plan. I tried to think of options, the forensic audit. That was my only hope. My father's codicil required a full review of all asset transfers during the marriage. If the auditors found something, some evidence of fraud or manipulation, maybe I could get the settlement overturned. But Richard was smart, Richard was careful. Richard had been planning this for years while I was too blind and too broken to notice. If he had left any trails, any evidence, he had probably already buried it so deep no one would ever find it. The next morning, I used the last of my cash to take an Uber to Richard's penthouse to pick up the children. The apartment was everything my crumbling townhouse was not. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, designer furniture, a kitchen with granite countertops, and stainless steel appliances. Richard answered the door in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand, looking like a man without a care in the world. "You look terrible, Elle." He smiled that charming smile that used to make my heart flutter. Now it made my stomach turn. "Did you sleep at all? Where are the children?" Getting dressed, he leaned against the doorframe, blocking my entry. "You know, you could make this easier on everyone. Just sign off on the settlement. Stop dragging out the inevitable. The kids hate being caught in the middle of all this drama, the drama you created. Is that what we are telling ourselves now?" He shook his head, mock sad. "I suppose it is easier than taking responsibility." Emma appeared behind him, dragging her overnight bag. She barely looked at me as she pushed past. "Come on, Lucas. Mom is here." Lucas was quieter. He always was. He climbed into my borrowed car without a word, then immediately put on his headphones and stared out the window at nothing. "How was your weekend with Dad?" I asked, trying to sound normal, trying to be the mother they needed me to be. Emma snorted. "Fine. Dad took us to Giordano's. He said you are too lazy to cook real food." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull over and explain everything. I wanted to tell my children that their father was a liar and a thief who had stolen their inheritance and destroyed their mother. But I could not do that. I could not use my children as weapons in this war. I could not destroy their relationship with their father just to make myself feel better. "That is not true, Emma," I said carefully. "I'm just going through a difficult time right now. Things will get better soon. Dad says you are always going through a difficult time." Emma's voice was matter of fact, reciting words she had clearly been fed. "He says that is why he had to leave. Because you were too difficult. Because you never appreciated anything he did for us." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I could hear Richard's voice in her words. I could hear months of careful programming, turning my daughter against me, one conversation at a time. That night, I made scrambled eggs and toast for dinner. It was all I could afford. The refrigerator was almost empty. The pantry held some canned soup and a half-eaten box of crackers. Emma pushed her plate away. "This is breakfast food. Sometimes we have breakfast for dinner," I said brightly. "We can call it breakfast adventure night." She stared at me with her father's eyes. "It is pathetic." She stormed off to her room. The slam of her door echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. Lucas ate his eggs in silence. He did not complain. He did not say anything at all. That worried me more than Emma's anger. Lucas had always been quiet, but this was different. This was the silence of a child who is trying very hard to be invisible. After the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to figure out what to do next. I had 87 days until the divorce was finalized. 87 days to somehow prove that my husband had stolen everything I owned. 87 days to rebuild my entire life from nothing. My phone buzzed. A new phone, purchased with money I did not have because I needed to be reachable for the children's school. It was my mother's number. I answered with a sinking feeling, Flora. Her voice was thin and frightened in a way I had never heard before. Something is wrong with me. I went to the doctor today. They ran tests. Tests? What kind of tests? For my memory. I have been forgetting things, names, dates. Last week I got lost driving home from the grocery store, a route I have driven 1,000 times. My heart clenched. Mom, they say I have dementia, baby, early onset. They say I need to move into a facility soon. Before it gets worse, I will figure something out. I will take care of you. The doctor gave me a list of places. The good ones cost $6,000 a month. Your brother says there is no money. He says your father left everything to you. He did, but I do not have access to any of it. Richard controls it all. A long pause. Then, quietly, with a clarity that cut through the confusion, I always told your father that boy was trouble. The first catastrophe was the eviction notice. The second was my mother's diagnosis. The third came 3 days later. I was in the kitchen, trying to stretch a can of soup into dinner for 3, when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find a woman in a gray suit standing on my porch, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Sterling, I am Mrs. Patterson with Child Protective Services. We have received an anonymous report about the welfare of your children. My blood ran cold. Anonymous report. There was nothing anonymous about it. I knew exactly who had made that call. Richard was building a case for full custody. He was using every weapon at his disposal to make me look like an unfit mother, and I had no way to fight back. Miss Patterson walked through my house with her clipboard, noting the sparse refrigerator, the worn furniture, the general air of poverty that had settled over everything like dust. The heating system is functioning? She asked, making a note. Yes. It is old, but it works. I see. She opened the refrigerator. The shelves were nearly empty. A carton of eggs, some milk, a half-eaten package of cheese. The children are getting adequate nutrition. I am going through a divorce, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. My husband froze our joint accounts. I am doing the best I can with limited resources. Mrs. Patterson nodded. Her face was not unkind, but it was not reassuring either. I understand. These situations are unfortunately common, but I am required to file a report based on what I observe. The refrigerator is quite minimal. Please? I could hear the desperation in my own voice. I hated it. I am doing everything I can. I have a job. I am working double shifts. I just need time. I believe you, but I have protocols to follow. I will be in touch. After she left, I sat on the floor of my kitchen and tried to remember how to breathe. That night, after Emma had locked herself in her room and Lucas had cried himself to sleep, I made a decision. I could not do this alone. I had been trying to handle everything by myself, trying to prove that I was capable, trying to be strong, but I was not strong. I was breaking, and if I broke completely, my children would have no one. I called Dana. I need help, I said. The words were the hardest I had ever spoken. I had spent so long believing I was supposed to handle everything on my own. Richard had trained me to think. Asking for help was weakness. I need help, Dana. I cannot do this alone. I am on my way. Her voice was immediate, certain. Pack a bag for you and the kids. You are staying with us. I cannot impose like that. You're not imposing. You are family. Now pack a bag and I will be there in 20 minutes. Donna arrived with her wife, Dr. Rachel Morrison. Rachel was a therapist, calm and steady, with kind eyes and a voice that made you feel like everything was going to be okay, even when it clearly was not. They helped me pack. They helped me get the children into the car. They did not ask questions or make judgments or tell me I should have done something different. They just helped. That night, sitting in Dana's living room with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, I finally said the words out loud. I do not know if I can do this. I do not know if I am strong enough. Dana sat down beside me. She did not argue. She did not give me a pep talk. She did not tell me to think positive, or believe in myself, or any of the other empty phrases people say when they do not know what else to offer. She just held my hand. You do not have to be strong enough alone, Flora. That is the whole point. That is what I have been trying to tell you for years. You have me. You have Rachel. You have people who love you. Rachel came in from the kitchen carrying a casserole dish. First you eat, then you sleep, then we plan. One step at a time. I looked at these two women, my friend who I had abandoned for 3 years because my husband told me to, her wife, who had every reason to resent me, but was instead offering me food and shelter and kindness. Why are you helping me? I asked, after everything I did. After I cut you out of my life, after I believed the worst about you. Dana smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real, because that is what sisters do, even when one of us forgets for a while. Rachel set the casserole on the coffee table. And because we have been exactly where you are, different circumstances, different details, but the same feeling of being completely alone and having no idea how to survive. Someone helped us when we needed it most. Now we are paying it forward. I started crying again, but this time the tears felt different. Not like drowning, like release. For the first time in months, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not hope, exactly. Not yet, but something close. The knowledge that I was not alone, the understanding that asking for help was not weakness. It was the first step toward finding my strength. 3 weeks later, I was living in Dana's spare room, working double shifts as a waitress and slowly learning that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. Dana had found me a forensic document examiner. Her name was Margaret Collins, a retired FBI analyst who now did pro bono work for domestic abuse, survivors, and fraud victims. Margaret was 63 years old, with steel gray hair cut short and practical, and glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. She had spent 2 weeks analyzing the documents Richard's legal team had submitted to the court. 47 documents that supposedly proved I had agreed to every asset transfer, every corporate restructuring, every financial decision that had drained my inheritance into Richard's pockets. Mrs. Vance, Margaret said, spreading papers across Dana's kitchen table, like a surgeon laying out instruments. She had a way of speaking that demanded attention, every word precise and deliberate. I have analyzed every document submitted by your husband's legal team. I leaned forward, my heart pounding, and, of these 47 documents, 12 show significant irregularities consistent with signature forgery. I stared at her. Forgery? You are saying he forged my signature? Additionally, 8 documents show signs of being backdated. The ink composition does not match the paper aging. The type of ink used was not commercially available until 2 years after the supposed signing date. Someone created these documents recently and attempted to make them appear older. Dana grabbed my hand across the table. Flora, this is evidence, real evidence. If we can prove he forged documents, the entire settlement could be invalidated. I felt hope bloom in my chest for the first time in months. If Richard had committed fraud, if he had forged my signature on legal documents, that was not just grounds for overturning the divorce settlement. That was a felony. I learned something important that day. If you are going through a divorce and something seems off about documents you supposedly signed, you have the right to request a forensic document examiner. Courts can order them. They analyze handwriting, ink composition, paper quality, and forgery in divorce proceedings is not just unethical. It is criminal. Most people do not know this. I did not know it until Margaret explained it to me, but it changed everything. I called the legal aid attorney who had been assigned to my case and told him what Margaret had found. He was skeptical at first. Court-appointed lawyers see a lot of desperate people making a lot of desperate claims. But when I sent him Margaret's preliminary report, his tone changed. "This is significant," he said. "If her findings hold up, we may have grounds to halt the divorce proceedings entirely." He filed a motion to postpone the finalization of the settlement and open a criminal investigation into document fraud. He submitted Margaret's analysis as evidence. He argued that the integrity of the entire divorce proceeding was compromised. The motion was granted. For one perfect week, I believed I had won. I hugged my children and told them everything was going to be okay. I called my mother at her assisted living facility and promised her I would be able to pay for her care soon. I even started painting again. For the first time in years, covering canvas after canvas, with colors that felt like hope. Then Richard's lawyers filed their countermotion. They claimed that I had forged the documents myself in a desperate attempt to frame my husband. They submitted evidence to support this claim. Therapy notes from sessions I had attended 5 years earlier. Sessions where I had discussed my feelings of powerlessness and my desire to regain control. The therapist, Dr. Warren Fletcher, provided a sworn statement claiming that I had expressed fantasies of revenge against my husband and detailed plans to manipulate legal proceedings. He characterized me as delusional, vindictive, and prone to fabrication. This was the same therapist Richard had insisted I see, the same therapist who had prescribed medication that made me foggy and compliant, the same therapist whose bills had been paid directly by Richard. I realized then, with a clarity that made me sick, that Richard had been planning this for years. Every therapy session had been a trap. Every vulnerable confession had been recorded and saved for exactly this moment. The court held a hearing to review both claims. Richard's legal team had more documentation than mine. They had expert witnesses willing to testify to my instability. They had a narrative that had been carefully constructed over years of planning. Marcus Blackwood presented their case with the smooth confidence of a man who had never lost. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mrs. Sterling has a documented history of fabrication and manipulation. Her own therapist will testify to her pattern of dishonesty. These allegations of forgery are simply the latest in a long line of attempts to avoid accepting the consequences of her own choices." The judge reviewed both sides. She spent a long time reading the documents, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "The court finds insufficient evidence to pursue criminal fraud charges against either party at this time. The forensic analysis raises questions, but does not conclusively prove forgery. The divorce proceedings will continue as originally scheduled." Richard's smirk returned. I saw it from across the courtroom. That same expression he had worn the day this all began. The expression that said he had won and I had lost, and there was nothing I could do about it. I made it to the courthouse bathroom before I collapsed. Dana found me on the floor, hyperventilating so hard I could not see straight. She held me while I fell apart. He is going to win. I could barely get the words out between gasping breaths. He planned this for years, Dana. Every therapy session, every document, every conversation, it was all part of his plan. I never had a chance. Dana did not argue with me. She did not tell me I was wrong or that everything would be okay. She just held me and let me cry. When I was finally empty of tears, she helped me to my feet and walked me to the sink. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to pull myself together. The bathroom door opened. A woman walked in. She was in her 60s, well-dressed in a way that spoke of old money and good taste. Her silver hair was perfectly styled. Her eyes were sharp and observant, taking in everything. She went to the sink and began washing her hands, watching me in the mirror. "You are Flora Vance. Are you not? Arthur's daughter?" I nodded, too exhausted to lie. "I am Eleanor Thornton. I was your father's personal attorney for 30 years. I retired when he died." She turned off the water and faced me directly. Her gaze was intense, evaluating, and "I have been waiting for you to need me." I did not understand. My father's attorney? He had been dead for 5 years. His estate had been settled. What could she possibly have to do with any of this? "Your father knew Richard would show his true colors eventually," Eleanor continued. She handed me a tissue from her purse. "But he also knew that a simple will would not be enough to protect you. Richard is too clever, too careful, too well connected. So Arthur did something else." "What did he do?" "He left you a trail of breadcrumbs, but you have to follow them yourself." Eleanor pressed something into my hand. A brass key, old-fashioned, heavy. The number 1847 was stamped on the head. "He believed you were stronger than you knew. He just needed you to believe it too." I stared at the key. "I do not understand." "Everything you need is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank on Michigan Avenue." Eleanor pulled a slip of paper from her purse with the address written in careful script. "But I cannot tell you what is in it. Your father made me promise. Flora has to find the truth herself," he said, "or Richard's lawyers will claim I manufactured it." "Why? Why would he set it up this way?" Eleanor's expression softened. "Because he knew that if someone else saved you, you would never believe you could save yourself. And he needed you to believe, Flora, for whatever comes next." She left without another word. I stood there holding the key, trying to make sense of everything. Dana had been listening from the corner, giving us privacy, but not leaving me alone. "What was that about?" she asked. I looked at the key in my hand. It was heavy for its size. Solid. Real. "My father," I said slowly. "He left me something. He left me breadcrumbs. Look for the breadcrumbs. He had told me the night before my wedding, if things ever go wrong, look for the breadcrumbs." I had thought he was being paranoid. I had dismissed his warnings as overprotective nonsense, but my father had seen what I could not. He had looked at Richard Sterling and recognized the predator beneath the charming smile. And he had spent the last years of his life preparing for this moment, the moment I would finally be ready to fight. The next morning, I went to First National Bank on Michigan Avenue. I showed them the key, my identification, and the letter of authorization Eleanor Thornton had provided. They led me to a private room and brought out a metal box labeled 1847. Inside, I found everything my father had prepared for me. A leather journal filled with his handwriting. Dense, detailed notes about Richard Sterling's business dealings over the past decade, account numbers, transaction dates, names of associates and partners, a list of 5 names, each with contact information and a brief description. A burner phone, the kind you buy at convenience stores, with prepaid minutes. Old and outdated, but still functional, and a handwritten note on a single sheet of paper. "Dear baby girl, if you are reading this, it means things went wrong. It means Richard turned out to be exactly who I feared he was. And it means you are ready to fight back. I am sorry I will not be there to help you. I am sorry I could not stop this from happening, but I knew that trying to warn you would only push you away. You had to see the truth for yourself. Follow the money. Start with the Zurich account dated March 15, 2019. Everything connects from there. The people on this list are your allies. They have been waiting for you to call. Some of them are witnesses. Some have evidence. All of them have reasons to want Richard Sterling brought down. You are stronger than you know, Flora. You always have been. I just wish I had told you more often. I love you. I believe in you. Now go show that bastard what a Vance woman is made of. Dad. I read the letter 3 times. By the end, I was crying again, but these tears were different. Not despair, not hopelessness, something closer to determination. My father had spent years preparing this trap. He had gathered evidence, cultivated witnesses, set up systems, all while knowing he might not live to see it through. He had believed in me, even when I did not believe in myself. Now I had to prove him right. I spent the next 3 weeks learning about offshore accounts, shell corporations, and wire transfer tracing. I watched YouTube videos and read online guides and studied financial documents until my eyes blurred. I learned vocabulary I had never heard before. Layering, structuring, integration, the language of money laundering. I had always thought of myself as just an artist, someone who dealt in colors and emotions, not numbers and strategies. Richard had reinforced that belief at every opportunity. You are too creative for business, he would say. Your brain does not work that way. But here's what I discovered. Art and investigation are not so different. Both require patience. Both require attention to detail. Both require the ability to see patterns that others miss. I started tracking down the people on my father's list. The first name was Jerome Washington, former IT director at Vance Logistics, fired by Richard 3 years ago. I found him working at a small tech startup on the South Side. He was a big man with a gentle voice and suspicious eyes that softened when I told him who I was. Your father was the best boss I ever had, Jerome said. We were sitting in a coffee shop near his office, speaking in low voices. When he died, I knew things were going to change, but I did not expect how fast or how bad. What happened? About 6 months after Mr. Vance passed, I started noticing irregularities in the server access logs. Someone was downloading massive amounts of financial data to external drives. Terabytes of information, transaction records, contracts, communication archives. Richard. I reported it to the new board. They told me I was mistaken. When I kept pushing, I was terminated. They called it restructuring, but I knew the real reason. Jerome reached into his bag and pulled out a flash drive. I kept copies of everything. Your father taught me that. Always keep backups, he used to say. You never know when the original will disappear. The second name on the list was Melissa Hartley, Richard's ex-girlfriend from before he met me. I found her in a modest apartment in Evanston. She was in her early 40s now, with tired eyes and a wariness that spoke of hard lessons learned. He did the same thing to me, Melissa said. We were sitting in her living room, drinking tea that had gone cold hours ago. Smaller scale. I did not have a rich father. I was just a paralegal at a firm he was trying to impress, but the pattern was identical. What pattern? Love bombing at first, making me feel like the center of the universe, then slowly isolating me from everyone. My friends, my family, my sense of self. Financial control came next. He convinced me to add him to my bank accounts, to let him manage our bills. By the time I realized what was happening, he had drained everything. I felt sick. How long were you... Together. 2 years. When I finally got the courage to leave, he told everyone I was crazy. He said I had stolen money from him. He had documentation, forged signatures, fake records. Sound familiar? I nodded. Too familiar. Melissa leaned forward. I have journals from that time. Text messages I saved. Everything is documented. I have been waiting years for someone to believe me. She connected me with other women Richard had victimized, not just romantic partners. Business associates he had defrauded, employees he had sabotaged, a pattern of predatory behavior stretching back decades. That is the thing about serial predators. They leave a trail of bodies, and eventually, those bodies start talking to each other. The third name on the list was Dr. Helen Bradford, forensic accountant, professor at the University of Chicago. She agreed to meet me in her office on campus. The room was cramped and cluttered, every surface covered with papers and books and half-empty coffee cups. But her mind was sharp as a scalpel. I have been studying Richard Sterling's financial records for 2 years, Dr. Bradford said. Your father hired me before he died, paid me a retainer to keep watching, keep documenting. What did you find? She pulled up charts and graphs on her computer. The money laundering is extensive. He has been using Vance Logistics to route shipments for a criminal organization. The cartel pays him in cash. He cycles it through shell companies, declares it as revenue from consulting services, and moves it to offshore accounts. I stared at the screen. My father's company, the company he had built with his own hands, being used to launder money for criminals. That is not all, Dr. Bradford continued. The wire transfers cross state lines and international borders. That makes it federal, FBI jurisdiction, federal. The word echoed in my mind. Richard had bought off local police. He had corrupted local officials, but federal agencies did not answer to small-time power brokers. There is an FBI agent who has been tracking this cartel for 3 years, Dr. Bradford said. He just has not been able to find anyone on the inside willing to testify. Your husband is careful. He covers his tracks. But with your testimony and my evidence, we might finally have enough to bring him down. I compiled everything I had learned. Jerome's server logs, Melissa's documentation, Dr. Bradford's financial analysis, my father's journal, the forged documents Margaret Collins had identified. I presented it to my lawyer. He was skeptical at first, overwhelmed by the volume of information. But as he reviewed the evidence, his expression changed. This is extensive, he said. If even half of this is accurate, we are looking at major federal crimes, wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, maybe even RICO violations. He filed a motion to reopen the investigation based on new evidence. For the second time, I allowed myself to hope. For the second time, hope would betray me. The night before my new court date, I was back at the townhouse gathering more documents. Dana and Rachel had helped me negotiate with the bank to delay the foreclosure, and I needed to collect financial records that were still in my old filing cabinet. The children were asleep at Dana's apartment. The house was dark and quiet. I was alone. Someone knocked on the door. I checked the peephole. My blood froze. Richard stood on my porch, hands in his pockets, that easy smile on his face, looking for all the world like a friendly neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. I knew I should not open the door. I knew I should call the police or retreat to another room or pretend I was not home. But some part of me, some stupid, broken part that had loved this man for 15 years, needed to face him, needed to show him that I was not afraid anymore. I opened the door. Hello, sweetheart, Richard said. His voice was warm, almost affectionate, the voice he used when he wanted something. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. I think we do. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I stepped back automatically, giving him space. and hated myself for the instinct. I know you have been digging. I have to admit, Flora, I am impressed. He walked into the living room, looking around at the worn furniture and peeling paint. His expression was a mixture of contempt and amusement. I always underestimated you. Your father did too, in his way. He thought he could set up some clever traps and catch me. But here's the thing, sweetheart. He paused, turning to face me. I found his traps years ago. Every single one of them. I have been waiting for you to stumble across them. Then why are you here? Because I want to give you a choice. Richard sat down on my couch like he owned it, which, technically, he still did. You can keep pushing this investigation, keep digging, keep trying to play detective, or you can accept reality and move on with your life. The reality that you stole everything from me. I did not steal anything. You gave it to me. Every document has your signature. Every transfer has your authorization. Signatures you forged. Prove it, he smiled. Your forensic expert says some signatures are inconsistent. My experts say they are all genuine. It is your word against mine, and we both know whose word the court will believe. I forced myself to stand straight, to meet his eyes. I am not backing down. I was hoping you would say that. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Because I brought you something to think about. He placed the folder on the coffee table between us. Inside this folder are photographs of our children. Emma walking to school, Lucas at soccer practice, the route they take from Dana's apartment to the bus stop, their teachers' names, their favorite snacks, the license plate of Dana's car. My heart stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face. This is not a threat, Flora. Richard's voice was calm, reasonable, terrifying. It is just information. I am making sure you have all the information you need to make an informed decision. If you touch them, my voice was shaking. I could not control it. I would never hurt our children. I love them. But here's the thing about the people I work with. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. They do not share my sentimental attachment, and I cannot always control what they do. He stood up and straightened his jacket. You have 90 days until the divorce is finalized. Use them wisely. Sign the papers. Accept the settlement. Walk away quietly. And everyone stays safe. He walked to the door, then he paused and looked back. Your father thought he was so clever, setting up his little traps, hiring his little army. But he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated how far I was willing to go. Do not make the same mistake, Elle. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood frozen for what felt like hours. Then my legs gave out and I collapsed onto the floor. I called Dana. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. He threatened the children. The words came out in a rush, barely coherent. He came here. He showed me pictures of Emma and Lucas. He said his associates could hurt them. Dana's voice was immediate and fierce. Get out of that house. Now! Come back here. We are calling the police. But I already knew the police would not help. My father had put a name on his list. Officer Daniel Crawford, Chicago PD. He had put it there as a warning, not as a resource. When Officer Crawford arrived to take my statement, he was polite and professional and completely useless. Ma'am, these are photographs taken in public spaces, he said, flipping through the folder Richard had left. There is no explicit threat in this material. He said, his associates make problems disappear. Did he specify what kind of problems? Did he name specific individuals or actions? No, but the implication was clear. Officer Crawford sighed. Without a documented, specific, credible threat, there is nothing we can do. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. I understand you are going through a difficult divorce. These feelings of persecution are common. Have you considered speaking with a mental health professional? I stared at him. And I understood. My father had known. He had put Crawford's name on the list not as an ally, but as a warning. Crawford was on Richard's payroll. He had probably been bought years ago. After the officer left, I sat in Dana's living room, with the lights off, watching my children sleep in the next room. Richard wanted me to give up. He wanted me to be afraid. And I was afraid. I was terrified. The thought of anything happening to Emma or Lucas made me physically sick. But here is what Richard did not understand about mothers. Here is what he could not comprehend, because he had never loved anything more than himself. You can threaten us. You can hurt us. You can take everything we own. But the moment you threaten our children, you have made a very serious mistake, because there is nothing we will not do to protect them. No line we will not cross. No fear we will not face. Richard thought he was intimidating me into submission. Instead, he had just given me a reason to burn his entire empire to the ground. 6 weeks later, I sat in a conference room at the Federal Building in downtown Chicago, across the table from FBI Special Agent Marcus Webb. Agent Webb was younger than I expected, early 40s, with kind eyes and a wedding ring he kept twisting when he was thinking. He had been tracking the criminal organization Richard worked with for 3 years. He had file cabinets full of evidence, surveillance photos, intercepted communications. What he did not have was a witness, someone on the inside willing to testify. Until now. Mrs. Vance, Agent Webb said, leaning forward in his chair, if you are willing to testify and provide your evidence, we can offer protection for you and your children. Full FBI protection until the trial is over. What happens after the trial? If Richard is convicted, the threat goes away. The organization he works with will cut ties. They do not waste resources on failed assets. And if he is not convicted? Agent Webb was quiet for a moment. Then we figure out another plan. I appreciated his honesty. He could have promised me the moon. He could have told me everything would be fine. Instead, he told me the truth. What do you need from me? We need Richard to incriminate himself directly. We have financial records and third-party testimony, but a good defense lawyer could explain most of it away. What we need is Richard, on tape, admitting to the money laundering. How do we get that? You go to your final settlement meeting, you act defeated, you let him think he has won. Agent Webb slid a small device across the table, a wire. Men like Richard cannot resist gloating. If he believes you have given up, he will tell you everything. I picked up the wire. It was smaller than I expected, lighter. And if it does not work, then we try something else. But in my experience, narcissists always talk too much when they think they are safe. I went home that night and practiced my defeated act in front of the mirror. Slumped shoulders, downcast eyes, trembling voice. The broken woman Richard expected me to be. Dana watched from the doorway. You sure you can do this? Act like you have given up? I met her eyes in the mirror. I have been acting like everything was fine for 12 years while my husband systematically destroyed my life. I think I can manage one more performance. The day of the final settlement meeting arrived. Same courtroom, same players. But everything was different. I walked in wearing my $11 Goodwill coat. I kept my eyes down. I let my shoulders slump. I had not slept well in days, and for once, the exhaustion worked in my favor. I looked exactly like what I was pretending to be. A woman who had been utterly defeated. The wire was taped to my chest, hidden beneath my blouse. Agent Webb and his team were in a surveillance van outside, listening to every word. All I had to do was get Richard to talk. You look terrible, Flora. Richard's voice was rich with satisfaction. I hope you have finally come to your senses. I cannot fight any more, Richard. I made my voice small, broken. I just want this over. I will sign whatever you want. His lawyer presented the updated settlement terms. Even worse than before. Richard wanted primary custody now. He wanted the townhouse. He wanted everything. I let a few tears fall. They came easily. Please, Richard. Not the house. The kids need stability. Sign the papers, and I will let you keep the house. Richard leaned back, completely relaxed. Consider it a gift. You are always good at one thing, Elle. Knowing when you are beaten. I signed where his lawyer pointed. My hand trembled, and I did not have to fake it. Then I waited. Men like Richard cannot resist gloating. It is their fatal flaw. They spend so much energy believing they are the smartest person in any room that they cannot help but explain exactly how smart they are. You know, Richard said, his voice low and confident. I almost felt bad sometimes. Your father thought he was so clever, with his little contingencies. But I found them all, the Zurich accounts, the offshore trusts, the backup servers. I moved everything years ago. Arthur's money has been earning interest in places you will never find. I kept my eyes down, but the audit. They said they could not find anything illegal. Richard laughed. Of course they could not. The local auditors work for people who work for me. That is how the real world operates, Flora. Money does not just buy things. It buys people. It buys protection. He was confessing. Right here in open court. The wire was catching every word. I kept him talking, feeding his ego with questions. How did you do it all? I asked, my voice small and wondering. I never even suspected. Because you were too busy playing artist to pay attention. Your father left you an empire, and you just handed it over. The contracts you signed? They were not just asset transfers. They were authorizations to route shipments for certain business associates. What kind of business associates? Richard's smile widened. Very lucrative ones. You have been laundering money for a cartel for 4 years and did not even know it. There it was. A complete confession. On tape. Admissible in court. I touched my ear. The signal for the FBI to move in. Nothing happened. I touched it again. Still nothing. Something was wrong. The wire was dead. The surveillance team was not receiving. I felt panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I could not let Richard see my fear. I could not let him know anything was wrong. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check a text. Flora. Richard's voice was sharp. Put that away. We are almost done here. Sorry. I set the phone face down on the table, screen up, but not before activating the voice recording app. I kept Richard talking for another 5 minutes, about Vanessa, who he planned to replace with someone younger, about Officer Crawford, who was on his payroll, about every dirty deal he had ever made. He told me everything, and my phone recorded it all. Then the courtroom doors burst open, but it was not the FBI. It was Vanessa, and from the look on her face, she had heard everything. Vanessa Dalloway stormed down the courtroom aisle like a blonde tornado of fury. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor like gunshots. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup smeared, as if she had been crying. She was holding a tablet computer like it was a weapon. Younger lineup in Geneva? Her voice was a shriek that echoed off the high ceilings. You told me we were partners, Richard. You told me I was different. Richard stood up, his composure cracking. Vanessa, sweetheart, you are making a scene. A scene? She laughed, and it was a terrible sound. The sound of a woman who had just realized she was nothing but a temporary convenience. I gave you 3 years. I sabotaged Flora's documents for you. I called CPS on her kids. I helped you set up those offshore accounts. I could not believe what I was hearing. Vanessa was confessing. Right here, in front of the judge, in open court. She was admitting to everything. My phone kept recording. Judge Caldwell slammed her gavel against her desk. Order! What is going on here? Vanessa whirled to face the judge. Your Honor, I have evidence. I have all the evidence. Richard made me keep copies of everything because he said he did not trust his own lawyers. Well, he should not have trusted me either. She thrust the tablet at the judge. On the screen were folders and folders of files, wire transfer records, forged signature templates, emails discussing illegal shipments, photos of Richard with men who were very obviously not legitimate business associates. Richard lunged for the tablet. He moved faster than I had ever seen him move, desperate to grab the device before its contents could be revealed. Security guards intercepted him. Two men in uniforms tackled him to the ground. His expensive suit tore at the shoulder as he struggled. She is lying, Richard screamed, all his polished composure gone. She is manipulating everyone. Vanessa, I will destroy you. You already tried, remember? Vanessa's voice was ice cold. The prenup you made me sign? The one that said, I get nothing if we split? I had a lawyer review it. It is not enforceable because it covers illegal activity. All those clauses about keeping quiet about your business dealings, they prove you knew what you were doing was criminal. The courtroom doors opened again. This time, it was Agent Webb and his FBI team, badges out, hands on their weapons. Richard Sterling, Agent Webb announced, his voice carrying across the room. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. We apologize for the delay. We experienced technical difficulties with our surveillance equipment. His eyes found mine. But Ms. Dalloway's evidence more than compensates. They pulled Richard to his feet and handcuffed him. His legal team was already packing their briefcases and heading for the exits. Marcus Blackwood, the butcher, did not even look back at his client. As they led Richard toward the doors, he passed directly in front of me. His face was twisted with rage. This is not over, Flora. His voice was barely a whisper, but I heard every word. I have people. You will never be safe. I will find a way to destroy you from prison if I have to. I looked him directly in the eyes, something I had not been able to do in years. Richard. My voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. You do not have people anymore. You have former employees who cannot wait to testify. You have an ex-mistress who just handed your entire criminal empire to the FBI on a silver platter. And you have me. I stood up straight. I let him see who I really was. Not the broken woman he had spent 12 years creating, but the woman who had survived him. My father taught me that empires are not built on money. They are built on loyalty, and you have none. They took him away. I watched until he disappeared through the doors, until I could no longer hear his protests echoing off the marble walls. Then I turned around. Emma and Lucas were standing in the gallery with Donna and Rachel. They had come to support me. They had seen everything. Emma's face was streaked with tears. Lucas was holding his sister's hand. Mom? Emma's voice was small, nothing like the angry, defiant girl who had blamed me for everything. Is it over? I walked to my children. I pulled them both into my arms and held them as tightly as I could. The hardest part is over, sweetheart. Now we get to rebuild. Richard's federal trial lasted 6 weeks. I testified for 2 days. I walked the jury through every document, every forged signature, every financial manipulation. I explained how Richard had isolated me from friends and family, how he had convinced me I was incapable of understanding business, how he had used my trust against me at every turn. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Sitting in that witness box, with Richard watching me from the defense table, telling the world every shameful detail of my own blindness, admitting how completely I had been fooled. But it was also liberating. For years, I had carried the weight of my own stupidity in secret. I had blamed myself for not seeing what was happening. Now, finally, I could share that burden with others. I could let the truth set me free. Jerome Washington testified about the server logs. Melissa Hartley testified about Richard's pattern of predatory behavior. Dr. Helen Bradford walked the jury through 12 years of money laundering in excruciating detail. Vanessa cut a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for reduced charges, she provided full testimony about Richard's operations. Account numbers, contact names, secret recordings she had made of Richard discussing his criminal activities. Richard's defense team tried everything. They claimed the evidence was manufactured. They attacked my credibility. They suggested I was a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. The jury did not believe any of it. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering, tax evasion, forgery. The list went on and on. The judge sentenced Richard to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 12 years. The maximum sentence allowed under the law. I was in the courtroom when she read the sentence. I sat quietly and let the words wash over me. Guilty. 18 years. Maximum sentence. For 12 years, Richard had made me believe I was worthless. He had convinced me that I was nothing without him. He had spent more than a decade building a prison around me. A prison made of lies and manipulation and carefully constructed self-doubt. Now he was going to a real prison, and I was finally free. But freedom, I discovered, was not the same as healing. In the months after the trial, I made decisions about my future. Some of them surprised me. I sold Vance Logistics, the company my father had built, the empire Richard had stolen, the organization that had been used to launder money for criminals. I sold it to an ethical buyer who promised to keep the employees and clean up the operations. I could have kept it. I had learned more about business in 6 months of fighting Richard than in all my years of marriage. I understood now what I was capable of. But I did not want to spend the rest of my life in my father's shadow. I used the money to pay off my mother's care facility for 10 years. I bought a modest house with a yard big enough for Lucas to practice soccer. I opened a small art studio and gallery, which I called Second Canvas. I started painting again. Not for critics, or galleries, or anyone else's approval. For myself. For the sheer joy of creating something beautiful in a world that had shown me so much ugliness. Emma started therapy. It took time, but slowly, the angry girl who had blamed me for everything began to soften. She stopped defending her father. She started talking to me again. "Mom," she asked one night, curled up on my bed like she used to do when she was small. "How did you know that Dad was lying?" I thought for a long time before answering. I did not know for a long time, sweetheart. I trusted him. I loved him. And he used that against me. But eventually, I started listening to the people who cared about me. Dana, your grandmother, my own gut feelings. They were all trying to tell me the same thing. "But you stayed so long." I nodded. I stayed too long, much too long, and I will probably regret that for the rest of my life. But here's what I learned. It is never too late to start over. It is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to fight back. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be strong like you someday." I hugged her tight. "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." Lucas healed too, in his own way. The nightmares that had plagued him for months slowly stopped. He started smiling again, playing with friends, being a normal kid. He did not talk about his father much. One night, I asked him if he wanted to visit Richard in prison. Lucas thought about it for a long time, his face serious with that thoughtfulness that always reminded me of my father. Then he shook his head. "I do not think so, Mom. I think I want to just be here, with you and Emma, our new family. That is okay, baby. That is more than okay." Dana and Rachel became permanent fixtures in our lives. honorary aunts. They came over for dinner every Sunday. They helped Emma with her homework. They taught Lucas to play chess. They filled the house with laughter and warmth and unconditional love. Life was not perfect. There were hard days, days when I woke up in a panic, convinced that Richard had somehow escaped prison, somehow found us, somehow was waiting outside my door. But there were good days too, more and more of them as time went on. Recovery is not a destination. It is a practice, a daily choice to keep moving forward, even when forward feels impossible. A commitment to believe in yourself, even when you have been trained to doubt everything. I learned that the hard way. And I learned something else too. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. 2 years after Richard's conviction, I stood in my gallery on opening night of my first major show. The walls were covered with my paintings, abstract pieces in blues and golds, exploring themes of destruction and renewal, loss and recovery, the complicated process of rebuilding a life from nothing. I had called the collection Rising. The room was full of people, friends, family, supporters I had gathered along the way. Dana and Rachel were in the corner, making everyone laugh with stories I could not quite hear. Jerome Washington was there, looking uncomfortable in a tie, but smiling broadly. Eleanor Thornton had come out of retirement to handle my legal affairs, and she stood by the refreshment table, critiquing the wine selection with the precision she once applied to corporate law. Margaret Collins, the forensic analyst who had first discovered the forged signatures, was admiring a painting called Evidence. Dr. Helen Bradford had brought her students from the university, pointing out themes and techniques I had never consciously intended. And in the middle of it all, Emma and Lucas were eating too many appetizers and making faces at each other across the room. Normal kids, happy kids. Kids who were finally free from the shadow of their father's lies. "Mom," Emma called out, "someone wants to buy the big blue one, the one you said was about starting over." I smiled. Then I guess we should let them. I wandered through the gallery, accepting compliments, answering questions about technique and inspiration, feeling like I was floating slightly above the ground. 2 years ago, I had been broke, desperate, and utterly convinced I would never matter again. Now I was standing in a gallery full of people who had come to celebrate my work, my vision, my voice. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I was having such a good time. I did not want to deal with telemarketers or wrong numbers or any of the mundane intrusions of everyday life. But something made me answer. "This call is from Cook County Correctional Facility. An inmate is requesting to speak with you. Do you accept?" I hesitated. My finger hovered over the decline button. Then I walked to a quiet corner of the gallery and accepted the call. Flora. Richard's voice was different, tired, smaller, like all the air had been let out of him. Prison had not been kind. I could hear it in the flatness of his tone, the absence of the charm he had once wielded like a weapon. "You have 1 minute," a pause, then, "Do the kids ever ask about me?" I thought about the family portrait Lucas had drawn last week. Him, Emma, me, Donna, and Rachel. 5 figures around a dinner table, holding hands. Richard was not in the picture. "Lucas drew a picture of our family a few days ago," I said. My voice was calm. Even, I was not angry. I was not sad. I was simply stating facts. It showed him, Emma, me, and Dana, and Rachel. "You were not in it, Richard." Silence on the other end. "But he did not leave you out with hate." That is the thing. He left you out because he has stopped thinking about you. You are not part of his life anymore. That is worse than hate, is it not? Just being forgotten. Flora, I never meant to. Your minute is up. Wait, please. I need to tell you something. I need to explain. I thought about it. For half a second, I considered letting him speak, letting him try to justify everything he had done, letting him manipulate me one last time. Then I remembered all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, all the times he had made me feel worthless, all the damage he had done to our children. No, Richard, you do not get to explain. You do not get closure. You get to sit in your cell and think about everything you destroyed. You get to watch our children grow up without you. You get to know that I am living my best life while you rot behind bars. Flora. Goodbye, Richard. I hung up. I stood there for a moment, holding the phone, waiting to feel something. Anger, satisfaction, vindication. What I felt instead was peace. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked back into the gallery. Emma ran up to me with a canapé in each hand. Mom? Who was on the phone? No one important, sweetheart. Just someone from the past. I looked around the room at the life I had built, the art I had created, the people who loved me, the future that stretched out before me, full of possibility. Richard Sterling had spent 12 years trying to make me small, trying to convince me that I was nothing without him, trying to reduce me to a supporting character in his own story. But I was never small. I was never nothing. I had just forgotten who I was for a while. Now I remembered. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, I sat alone in my gallery. The paintings glowed softly in the security lights, colors shifting and shimmering as clouds moved across the moon outside. I thought about all the women out there who were where I had been, trapped in relationships that looked perfect from the outside, convinced they were worthless, afraid to leave, afraid to stay, afraid to exist. I pulled out my phone and started typing. A message. A story. A testimony. If you are listening to this, I wrote, and you are where I was, broke, scared, convinced that the monster in your life is too powerful to defeat, I want you to know something. You are not crazy. You are not weak. And you are not alone. I know it does not feel that way. I know it feels like everyone believes him, and no one believes you. I know it feels like the system is rigged, and there is no point in fighting. But that is a lie. The same lie he tells you every day to keep you small. The same lie that kept me trapped for 12 years. Here is the truth. You are stronger than you know. You have survived things that would break most people. Every day you get through is proof of your strength. And there are people out there who will help you. I found my people when I had given up hope of ever finding them. Dana showed up with a casserole and a couch and a willingness to fight for me when I could not fight for myself. Rachel talked me through the darkest nights. Margaret and Helen and Jerome and Eleanor, they all showed up when I needed them most. Your people are out there too. You just have to reach out. You just have to ask for help. That is the hardest part, I know. Asking for help feels like admitting defeat. It feels like proof that you cannot handle things on your own. But here's the secret no one tells you. None of us can handle things on our own. We are not supposed to. We are meant to lean on each other, to carry each other's burdens, to be stronger together than we could ever be alone. So, reach out. Call that friend you have not talked to in years. Find a support group. Tell your story to someone who might understand. And then fight. Fight for yourself. Fight for your children. Fight for the life you deserve. The smirk will fade. It always does. Men like Richard Sterling think they are untouchable, but they are not. They think they are smarter than everyone else, but eventually they make mistakes. They get caught. They fall. The divorce papers are just paper. They can be contested. They can be overturned. They are not the end of your story. But you are still here, and that means you have already won the hardest battle. the battle to survive. Now it is time to win the rest. Thanks for listening, and remember, never sign the papers until you have read every word. Twice. I hit send. The message went out into the world, a small beacon of hope for anyone who needed it. Then I stood up and looked around my gallery one last time, at the paintings on the walls, at the life I had built, at the future stretching out before me. I turned off the lights and walked home through the quiet streets, under the stars, in the city where I had been broken and rebuilt. Behind me, the gallery held my story, my truth, my voice. Ahead of me, my children slept peacefully, safe and loved. And somewhere, in a prison cell, Richard Sterling sat alone with the memory of his smirk and the knowledge that it had meant nothing at all. I smiled, not a smirk, a real smile, the smile of a woman who had found her way home. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own battle or someone you love who is still fighting, I have a small favor to ask. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For the next woman who needs to hear this story at 2 in the morning when she is sitting in her car, wondering if she is strong enough to leave a comment below. Share your own story if you feel safe doing so. Or simply write the words, "I survived," because every comment, every share, every like tells the algorithm to show this story to someone who desperately needs to hear it. And if you know someone who is trapped right now, someone who has forgotten how strong she really is, please share this video with her. Sometimes a story is the lifeline that pulls someone back from the edge. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this community of survivors. Now go out there and show the world what you are made of. And remember, never sign the papers until you have read every word. Twice.